Welcome to the Peace is Possible podcast, a space for real talk on healing, leadership, and conscious change. I'm Evrard, founder of Peace Activation and your host. Each episode brings you insights and tools to help you live and lead from a place of inner peace and ripple that peace outward. Tune in, reflect, activate. Subscribe whenever you listen to podcasts and visit peaceactivation.org to learn more. Welcome, Pooven. I am so happy to host you today with our Peace is Possible podcast. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Eva. Wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. So I always ask my invitee to introduce themselves because I personally feel uncomfortable when people introduce me and I'm just like listening to them reciting my bio. So tell us who you are and what's your genius anyway. Thank you.
I hope I have some genius, but on the question of who I am, that's like many of us, it's been a lifelong exploration in terms of our identity and who we are versus who we think we are. And part of it is being labeled by ourselves or by others in our communities or professions and so on. And it's really interesting when someone asks to say who you are. Through my own journey, I've learned that on the one hand, it's been exploring me as a human, but in my own exploration, it's led me to explore myself beyond being human in terms of where we come from, how we connected to the rest of the cosmos, how we connected to other parts of nature. And in my journey of exploration, I've come to know myself now as being an energetic being connected to everything. And I feel as you ask me that question now, that's what I feel in terms of who I am. And I do think we've, have reached that breaking point of separation from everything and everyone. And we're absolutely on this journey of reconnection. If I was in a meeting with lawyers, I would say I'm a human rights and environmental lawyer from South Africa. If I'm in a group of movements and activists, and been an activist since I was about 13 in the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. And, a lot of my life has been shaped for the struggle of justice, not just here in South Africa, but eventually, throughout the world, especially working with indigenous and other communities that are fighting for their rights or are trying to protect their territories of life and ecosystems. More recently, I was surprised to know that I'm an artist in the sense of going to a recording studio and recording with Seth, who's an incredible musician, a meditation track, and soon to release a book as well. So, and I love writing poems. So just to give you an essence of some parts of me.
I love that. And the reason I asked that question is to show how multidimensional being we are, and putting ourselves in a box of identities that are kind of classified in boxes is not really truly encompasses who we truly are. I want to invite you also to tell us a bit more about your work with the Earth Rise Collective and our upcoming collaboration.
Yeah, great. So through my exploration and being an activist and a lawyer, my sense was, we in South Africa, we've fought against the apartheid regime, for justice, for peace, for all of the other things that we fought for back then. At the same time, you realize, wait a minute, do people actually have justice now? The inequality is still very well. South Africa's the most unequal country in the world. A lot of people still go to bed hungry, etc. And so, the constant questioning of, okay, we've won that struggle, but have we actually won? And then we can say that about most struggles, around the world. We've managed to protect something, and then later on there'd be another big project or something that would threaten, its destruction. And so in 2020, COVID hit amongst all the other crises that were already there. There was an even deeper questioning about what's actually going on in the planet, and how have we reached this point as humanity? And through that, I guess that deep questioning, each one of us during that time, I started having bilateral conversations with activists, with wisdom keepers from different traditions, and people that are trying alternative things. And in that conversations, I found them very rich, and decided to host a conversation where I just bring the people I know from around the world into a space for us to reflect and share what we're feeling and what's happening on the planet. And the first one we did was in August 2020. We didn't realize initially that it was on a full moon, and it was. And everyone there really enjoyed sharing from their hearts what they were feeling at the time. And then slowly, people were sharing from their tradition based on their prophecy, how they see what's happening on the planet at this time. Activists that were now disconnected from communities, including myself, us being a human rights and environmental law firm across Africa, when I was at the head of national justice, being disconnected from communities we've always worked with, and trying to figure out how do we back up these communities, because the big projects were still going ahead, even though they were like, restriction of movements for people, etc. The deals were still being done. And through that process, this Earthrise collective emerged of activists, wisdom keepers, and people trying alternatives. And that became, let's say, our overarching themes of bringing ancient wisdom for the time we're in, fueling the activism based on ancient wisdom that we've been missing out in the activism, and bringing that knowledge to see how we can live differently on the planet without repeating the issues from the past, or the patterns from the past that lead us into destruction. And through that process, we realized, actually, we all are carrying traumas, and we're trying to create new things with our traumas. And, we really need to go on this deep journey individually and collectively, where we deal with the traumas. We, look at things in a different way, and then create in a way that comes, from a deep, energetic space. And that was the birth of the Earthrise Collective.
Thank you. Thank you, Pooven, for this background. And I think this realization that we're all walking wounds, and we don't realize how intergenerational trauma and collective trauma and individual trauma are all interconnected, and kind of define how we define ourselves and our action in the world. And unless we are working on this with awareness, or at least having some kind of self-awareness of where we're coming from when we are acting, when we are teaching, when we are speaking, it kind of defeats the purpose. And so my question is, I heard you say activism, and since the launch of Peace Activation, I constantly repeat activation rather than activism, because I feel we've been activists for so long, and kind of repeating similar pattern, repeating or reproducing unconsciously what we just fight for. And so for me, and that's where peace activation is coming from, is like activation stands for let's activate peace inside of us, and then it will ripple outside. And so what I mean in that is really, how am I showing up with the knowledge of where I'm coming from and what I'm reproducing in terms of trauma, whether it's individual, intergenerational, and a collective trauma. And just from my own personal experience as Palestinian, I still reproduce my trauma in traveling, in belonging. I live in Costa Rica. I can't tell you how many homes I've changed. And it's interesting when I share it with other friends, Palestinian that are in the diaspora, how we actually reproduce the same pattern, even when we're living in a very comfortable and peaceful environment, yet the internal environment is actually so connected to our ancestors, to our what's happening in our land. And so this whole notion of trauma, without it being weaponized like it is right now, how can we find the right balance between activation and activism? And the book that I'm currently reading that inform a lot of what I'm speaking about is healing justice. How can we bring healing to justice and liberation and make sure that it's collective liberation and it's not identified through identities, specific religions, specific traditions even. And I feel like Earthrise Collective, because of the collective of the variety of wisdoms and variety of region and tradition, have really a beautiful gift in the current context that we're working. So can you speak more to that about how we can use that and how we will hopefully be using that within the upcoming retreat that we have here in Costa Rica?
Yeah, no, thanks, Eva. I'll say a few things. One is, as I went to different communities around the world, on looking at how best we can support and protect the territories and communities, I was always fascinated by the elders in those communities, because the elders in those communities went through horrific things that had happened to them and their communities. What's happened in Canada as an example, in terms of residential schools and other kind of atrocities to First Nations people in Australia, for example, that they're still being decimated. And their lands through, massive mining and other projects that are poisoning their rivers, or the San communities here in South Africa, for example, that were hunted in the 1600s. During apartheid, were just thrown into very specific areas with nothing there, and these are nomadic people. And the ongoing, decimation in terms of dignity, in terms of rights, and so on. But sitting with the elders in these different traditions, I was just fascinated by their individual journeys and how, they went through the different stages of being, fighting back, stages of deep frustration and anger in terms of the injustice, and eventually going through processes that were deeply spiritual processes, and that didn't mean they lost their fight or activism. In fact, they were activists, throughout their life. That it was starting to come from a very different place. And the key thing there was the individual processes that these elders, went through. And they took me into a lot of their ceremonies in the different traditions and so on. And I started going through my own process. But through that inner journey, the realization that, you can get up one morning and feel like the world is the most amazing place, that everything feels alive and so on. And the next day you can get up and think, this is the most horrific place, and I just don't want to be here, wherever you are. The realization for me that there's a lot of this that's inside of us, obviously, not taking away from all the things that are happening to people right now, including the genocide in Palestine and everything else that's going on at the moment. And once you at the front line in the coal face, it's just it's relentless. It's continuous. And within that, somehow finding like during the dark days of apartheid in South Africa, at that stage, it was about survival. There were people that were trying to assassinate us. There were constantly running from the apartheid forces and so on. And it was difficult to think of anything to do with peace, or anything to do with trying to sit and reflect on the meaning of life. It was being chased, and you were in that space. And over a period of time, having experienced atrocities and seen it in so many places in the work and communities I work with. That's really pushed me deeper and deeper because, one just loses one's mind in trying to say, okay, but how do we fix this? How do we stop the injustices? And we'll always continue to do that. And I certainly will for the rest of my life. But at the same time, I had to find something within myself that allowed me to be centered, allowed me to find peace within myself, and that doesn't take away from anything, outside of myself. But it's helped me to continue to find the energy, to fight the battles, to be part of different struggles, and so on. But from a place that's very different from where I was, a year ago, a decade ago, or a few decades ago, in terms of finding this. And I think with the Earthrise Collective, having people where we can share deep from within our souls our life stories, what we're feeling, what's going on, but to tap into that ancient wisdom, especially at this moment, it brings something so rich, knowing that, we've been taught all our lives a specific way of thinking, a specific way of being. Everything is about how do we extract value out of everything. And once you open yourself to, all of the other traditions and the knowledge, you realize, just the interconnectedness of everything. And if we're hurting someone else, the deep hurt and the wound within ourselves and how connected we are. And unless we all living in peace in different ways, we'll never feel completely like, I'm at peace here and, whatever's happening somewhere else, it's okay. But more and more you find, within yourself to hold that place of peace.
Thank you. Thank you, Pooven. I just want to check, are you hearing me properly?
I am.
Good sound? Yeah, okay, good.
Yeah.
I want to hold into this notion of how interconnected we are and the role of nature in this. Like you and I are collaborating with the Nature Law Institute, and we're going to be collaborating also with Zach in the upcoming retreat into coherence. And a lot of it is around, let's go back to our own nature. Our disconnection from nature have disconnected us from our own nature. And by going back to nature, we will reconnect with our own nature. And so nature is playing a huge part, at least in my own actually spiritual awakening, but also in my ability to find peace within me, despite the chaos and the ongoing genocide and all the crisis and that I'm experiencing outside, but also inside of me. And how can we be centered in the midst of the storm? And so can you share some of the wisdom keepers traditions and how or what would you be bringing into that?
Yeah, no, I think part of it is the way we experience the world, and I'll start bringing it from a bit of a legal perspective and then weaving from there. Some of the work we're doing here in South Africa is looking at Hurikwacho, or Table Mountain, which is a very sacred mountain, and looking at the recognition of the mountain, like the legal recognition of the mountain. And the recognition of the mountain, is not about personhood. It's about recognizing the mountain as a divine being and what it holds energetically. And once we start to shift that, and we're shifting that within the law, but the idea is us shifting in consciousness as humanity. Once we start to realize that there's more to a mountain than the rocks that make up the mountain, and we start to understand why are these ancient traditions so connected to mountains or rivers or any sacred place around the world, we realize that each of these things, forests or jungles or mountains or rivers, are all energetic beings that we are very much connected to energetically, even if we don't see it. So when we take a walk on a mountain or around a swim, we have a certain feeling of being in a blissful state. generally. And and we think, it's really amazing to take a walk in the woods or the forest and just have a swim in the river. And as we spend more time doing that, we start to sense things, we start to feel things. So with some of the communities I'm working with in the Amazon, so like the Sariaku people in Ecuador, deep in the Ecuadorian Amazon, they for a long time have been pushing for this idea of the legal recognition of the spirit. They call it Kausak Sacha. And with the idea being that the communities there very much feel the spirit of the jungle. They very much connect and communicate with the spirit of the jungle. And so to them, that's real. It's, it's what they experience and what they feel and what they know. And when you're in that state of relationship with other parts of nature, when you start to log and cut everything down, you realize you're killing these incredible trees that have been there for such a long time. And you're also killing the spirit of the jungle. And in that way, you're killing the spirit of the people because of how connected they are. And so, there's that deep connection, understanding, and experience in many different ways. In a case against the oil company Shell in South Africa, we went to court and, after ceremony, with the communities along the coastline, besides the normal arguments about them not being consulted and the damage it will do to the ocean and to the people, what came in the ceremony was that the ancestors live in the ocean, and that we should argue that the ancestors are there. And if Shell blasts the ocean for 8 months, it will disturb the ancestors, and the ancestors would leave. And the Shell lawyers laughed at us. The judges took us very seriously, and we won the case, which is now a big precedent. And the point being that slowly there's a shift starting to happen in how we see, experience, and feel nature. From a technology perspective, there's a lot of people I'm connected with as well that are, looking at whale communication, plant communication, tree-to-tree communication. And I think we're reaching a time where, more and more of that's starting to come into the mainstream, as opposed to these being fringe sciences, for example. But more and more, the ancient wisdom is also coming forward. And I think what that's starting to do is bridge those ancient and modern worlds, which is a very powerful place, I think, we're reaching. And I think nature is providing like that platform of interconnection, that's starting to happen. And I was in Cortes Island in Canada a few months ago, and we were having a more than human life gathering on the island with experts and lawyers and scientists and journalists and others that had come together. And as I was presenting, the realization dawned on me from the legal perspective that we kind of on this journey. It's been, human-made law and largely extractive, exploitative human-made law that went throughout the world. And over a period of time, we went to looking at the rights of nature. And then beyond that was the interconnectedness, because we are nature, and the idea that we can't separate. So, many of us for a long time have pushed for this new human right, the right to a clean, healthy, sustainable environment, which was passed by the UN a few years ago, based on ancient wisdom about the interconnectedness. You can't say we're poisoning a river, but we're not poisoning the people. It's all interconnected. And so I think slowly that indigenous wisdom is finding its way, in all of these different spaces. And, so now the interconnectedness in the law and, us, speaking and pushing around the issue of natural law and that trajectory. And it just dawned on me that we actually now need to push even beyond that to cosmic law, because as we can see what's happening on the planet, whatever's happening here is being influenced by, everything beyond this planet. as well,
Mhm.
including ourselves. And so we entering that realm of the cosmos, to take that a bit further.
Thank you. I think also what we're giving nature a place at the table, it sounds like. And I find like, yeah, we cannot dissociate the human from nature. And also just thinking about what's happening right now and the land, like we're constantly fighting for the land, but when does the land have a space on the table to express what's happening to her, and how Mother Nature has been just like really destroyed at the on claiming to protect it, or claiming to that it belongs to one certain party than another. I think that bringing this to the center of the discussion, whether with the environmental law and all this environment movement that are happening. And right now I'm here at the Austrian Peace Center, and one of the courses that I teach is environmental peace building. Like, how did we forget where we live and the environment in which we live, and how the environment in which we live is influenced by the environment, the internal environment that is activating the trigger and the anger and the destruction that we're pushing each of us to really negate the rights of a certain people, certain religions, certain communities, certain tribe. And I think that bringing this awareness that nature has a place at the table as like a negotiating partner, and who is representing that. And in one of the contexts where we met, I don't remember the person, but there was the lawyer for nature. And I think that's kind of like representation of like not only human rights, and that there's nature's right. And nature's right is beyond any of the human rights that we have been intellectualized to kind of push forward. And how can we activate it from a place where we listen more than speak, where we witness more than impose, And there's a lot of healing around that listening, deep listening. And that's one of the tools that we use in peace activation, is like, can we listen even to the silence of the words that are unspoken? Because at some point, because of a lot of the silencing that happened with the genocide in Palestine, people had, at some point, there's no more words to express I want to say, how desperate and helpless and hopeless we are in the face of the impossible and the atrocity. And hopefully this would come to an end soon.
Yeah, no, I think, on the question of place at the table, a couple of thoughts are coming up. So one is, if you take any example of trying to fight for a place at the table, if you take, let's say, corporations, for example, back that they still largely male-dominated corporations around the world, governments or leaders that are still male-dominated leaders, and and fighting for a place at that table is one example. Or indigenous people fighting for a table at, global UN processes like the climate COP or any of these other spaces, which is still very much tokenistic as opposed to real engagement, because in the actual negotiations room, there's very few people, outside of governments and corporations that get to make these decisions. So that fight is ongoing. It's been there for a long time. And on the question of nature having a place at the table, the thought that comes to me is we at a point where it's a question of whether we'll have a space in nature's table. Let's put it that way, in the sense of, we have our human-centric view of, okay, we control everything, and let's invite, nature or whatever to the table. But in
or
reality,
just remove the table in a way. Like not even, I'm using inviting nature to the table because of the context and the way we speak about negotiation in this type of environment. But I think where we're heading is like, we're going to remove completely the table, and actually maybe sit on earth and listen more than sitting on chair and disconnecting from nature.
Yeah. Yeah, because my sense is, when I was in a climate march in New York many years ago, the thought that came to me back then was, if there isn't a revolution of humans to shift how we are and how we live on the planet, there'll be a revolution of nature. And that revolution has already kicked in, right? If we want to call it that, from nature, in what we're seeing, happening around the world. And as indigenous elders, knowledge keepers, scientists have continuously warned that our time is running out, the window is closing. If we're not able to do certain things, it's going to be too late, in the sense of the timing of everything. And I think through our human arrogance, we continue to feel like we are in charge. We'll create some scientific and technological solutions that will get us out of the mess. And the reality is, it's the rest of nature will do what it needs to purge what it needs to, including us. And I think, as we go through this process, both internally and externally, the reality is we're not going to fix the world. The reality is we have to understand who we truly are in terms of where we come from, who we are, and why we're here, at this particular time. And I think within that inquiry, it starts to open us up, and we start to connect with other parts of nature. We start to understand things differently, and so on. And I think, the transformation of the planet will only start through an inner transformation, which includes dealing with our traumas, including finding ultimate peace, within ourselves. Yeah,
absolutely. I think as spiritual being having a human experience, we have actually chosen to come here at this specific time because of the role that we each have in this time. And I really believe that each one of us, regardless of what we're doing, we all have a piece to bring to this peace, whether it's peace in Palestine, Israel, in Sudan, in Yemen, in Congo, regardless of where conflict pockets are arising right now and have been for the past centuries. We have chosen to come here to really, I deeply believe, to bring humanity to the next level. And so when we say humanity will prevail, humanity is not going to prevail somewhere out there. Humanity is going to prevail if each one of us is going to awaken to the role that we have chosen to incarnate. And that means each of the individual within each of this tradition and religion and identities, these fabricated identities that have dissociated us from our humanity, is really the action, the activation that each one of us have to remember, to allow this activation inside so that we can activate it outside and find a way to collaborate, because each of us working individually in our individual spot without the connection, without the interconnectiveness, without the interdependence, understanding that we're so interdependent, we're not independent and we're not codependent. And how can we together as one, even if we are different, how can we as one come together, come unity, create this community, global community that will allow us to move to the next level of humanity, a level of humanity that is not trapped in separation, in fear, in drama, and so much drama. And I often say we need to drop the drama to heal the trauma and to activate peace. But we cannot activate peace if we are locked in our trauma spiral, and we cannot heal our trauma if we're constantly attracting and activating the drama or going into a loop of drama. And all of this is really the practice of presence. It's like, how can I move from drama to presence to what is actually happening here and now, and not there and then? And I would love for you to share with us a practice that you bring into that space, because in the way we have imagined the retreat is really to move from the local to the global, to the planetary. And I would be holding the local with Sami Awad, and you will be holding the global, and Zach Bush will be holding the planetary. And I wonder, in your global container, what is it that you're bringing, and what type of practices are you going to share with us?
Yeah, thanks. To say these let's say the processes are not easy in the sense that we can't just skip to, where we are to a place. Suddenly we feel, okay, we suddenly, feel a bit more awakened, enlightened, and peaceful. The challenge being, we have to face what we need to face within ourselves and collectively as humanity. We have to see injustices for what they are. We have to see the patriarchy, for what it is, or the inequalities for what they are. Because someone living, in a space of genocide, or in a township in South Africa, as an example, facing sexual violence and daily additional traumas, it's we have to do this collectively, and so part of what I will bring is that sense of how do we, and because I have my foot in this world of human rights, environmental justice, law, and so on the one hand. On the other hand, I'm deeply connected to different traditions, to different wisdom keepers, to different knowledge systems, and so on. And over a period, have reconnected with my own ancestry, which is steeped in yoga, steeped in meditation, steeped in this kind of ancient, let's say, Vedic practices, which I will bring personally. But at the same time, as I've been initiated through different traditions around the world, we'll bring some of those practices into the space. In terms of guided meditations, in terms of fire ceremonies and other things I'm deeply steeped into. And a big part of, I think, coming together is about, the energetics of the place, but also the energetics of the people that are coming together, and, ensuring that, the container is sacred, ensuring that, we are able to hold each other as we're going through deeply personal journeys. And I think, I would definitely bring some of that based on what I've gained through many lifetimes, but also my connection with many different deeply rooted traditions as well.
Beautiful. Thank you, Pooven. Yeah, I feel like we're both similar also. One foot in the ordinary, and then one foot in the extraordinary. And I think that what you're speaking to is the embodiment, and how we embody actually the personal experience, and how we dealt personally with our own triggers. And that's why for me, peace activation is really, how do I activate peace inside of me? Not to ignore, like working on my inner peace, not to ignore the reality outside, but actually to work on my inner peace so that I can stand in face of injustices and be able to speak truth to power, and not allow my emotions to run me and manage me, and not enable me to really deal with what is and the reality. And so that I don't bring in something from the past while still connecting to the past, being in the present and really tracing who is it that is speaking through my mouth. We're coming to an end, and I'm trying to think, is there anything else I want to ask you? But would you like actually to share anything else with our audiences here?
Yeah, I would maybe share a quick story. A few months ago, we were invited by King Charles to his private residence, a few elders. And it was, an invitation that we had to think a lot about, given the nature of what the monarchy represents. I come from, my ancestors come from South India, and so there was the oppression in India, the oppression in South Africa, apartheid in South Africa, and now being invited, to go to, let's say, the seat of the empire in some ways. And but I was guided to join the other elders and to go, but we said we want to do a ceremony. We'll come there, but we also want to do a ceremony. So we did a fire ceremony, and as I was putting these logs into the fire, I kind of went through my own process of quickly going through my ancestry and the centuries of oppression, and then coming to this point. But the fire ceremony was really, really powerful, in the sense that it held not just my own journey through this, but all of the indigenous elders that were there, and the journeys they had to go through and their families had to go through. And as the ceremony proceeded, it was so powerful and palpable, and the energy was very powerful, that everyone around the fire, including the king, you could see something going on with each person, to a point where there were a lot of tears and emotion and different things that had emerged, and for me that was a very powerful moment, because politically, intellectually, as a human, and my political and activist and lawyer side would be feeling something, but with my deep being, I felt something different. I felt like this is not going to be the solution to the world issues, or that suddenly there's going to be justice or anything of that sort. But I did feel like us taking a fire ceremony, or having a fire ceremony at the residence of the king, shifted something energetically. And so, I think as we caught in this very difficult time, and we're looking for solutions and how to find or get to a point of peace, etc., I do think it requires that very deep journey, and I think that's the type of journey we will have, when we do get together at this upcoming session.
Thank you, Pooven. Yeah, I remember that story. I was hoping you will share it. So thank you for sharing it. It's pretty special because I deeply believe in the energetics and the symbolics of situation we find ourselves in. And sometimes we feel it's random, but it's actually not. It's really a synchronicity, and that's where I say you had a piece in that piece because of your ancestry, because of where you're coming from, what you've worked on, how you transform the conflict inside of you, and how you tame the dragon inside to be able to sit in the fire at the seat of the empire. And I'm like, right, as I said, right now I'm in Austria in this peace center, and I feel like even symbolically with what happened here in Second World War and how we are reproducing. We're constantly reproducing the past because we didn't deal with it. And we only can deal with it when we acknowledge the symbolics and the energetics and why we have made certain choices that have impacted what we're currently living. And I think it's very important to put it in context and to put it, especially with what's happening in the different pockets of conflict, to understand that it's not just like a conflict over there and a conflict over there. It's like all these conflicts are interconnected. And unless we deal with the colonial system and the neo-colonial system that have allowed it to continue, we're not going to be able to solve it. And so it's not about bringing people together to find peace inside or to meditate together or to eat together. It's actually to deal deeper into why, in the first place, are we sitting at the table? And as we said before, it's like reversing the table, removing the table, whatever we're doing with that table, we need to understand that it's not men in suits that are going to bring us peace. It's people on the ground. It's everybody. It's like not certain type of people, not women will build peace and men will go, like it's really every time I hear a group or a community that speak about like, we will bring this. I'm like, no, we will only bring peace if we are understanding that how interdependent we are. And it's really like a chain, and every single mile of the chain is important. And there's some work done outside of this castle. So bringing us to an end here, Pooven, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your genius, for the nuggets of wisdom. That's what I call genius, is really the nuggets of wisdom that we have built from our own experience through going through the fire of our own transformation, because it only happened when we go through our own triggers and whatever that is activating us inside. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Thanks for everything you do and everything you carry.
Have a beautiful afternoon.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, for feeling, and for holding space with us. If this episode moved you, please support the Peace is Possible podcast by subscribing, sharing it with friends, or posting it online. Every ripple counts. We'll be back next month with another conversation that dives deep into what it truly means to activate peace within and around us. To support the vision behind Peace Activation, visit peaceactivation.org and follow along on social media. You'll find both Peace Activation and me, Eva Dalak, across all platforms. Until next time, may you meet yourself and others with peace.